So I'm just going to assume that everything is working right now as we start recording. Actually, I'm going to do this belt and suspenders. Here we go. We're going to do some recording here in the cloud as well. And let's launch it. So this is Connect This. And we're going to be talking about some urban WISP type stuff today, urban wireless ISPs with our panel. I'm just going to launch right into introducing them. We've got Deborah Simpier of Althea. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. So I am Deborah Simpier. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Althea. We are a software platform for networks, kind of a holistic multi-stakeholder system that empowers communities to be able to build sustainable networks, quicker and more affordable than legacy networks that have a single stakeholder. And we have networks that we work with in 6 states and a couple countries, and are always kind of expanding here.
Yeah, so when I want to build a wireless network, I have Travis to help me hold my hand, but other folks that don't have that opportunity, they can turn to you to get a lot of that, the startup advice and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
We also have Mason Carroll, who's with Monkeybrains in San Francisco. Welcome to the show, Mason.
Thank you. Should I just tell a little about myself, I guess, what we're doing?
Yeah, definitely.
I'm Mason. I'm lead engineer over here at monkeybrains.net. We are primarily a wireless ISP in the San Francisco Bay Area. We have about 14,000 subscribers last time I looked. And yeah, we cover the San Francisco, Oakland, Alameda, South San Francisco Bay Area. And yeah, urban WISP, we're doing it.
Yeah, you've demonstrated. Whenever people ask me, hey, how does this stuff actually work when there's a lot of moisture in the air? I say, well, Monkeybrains seems to have figured it out. We got some fog there from time to time. We also have Travis Carter. Travis, you're from a company called Uzi?
Uzi, yes. Uzi. USI. We've shortened our US internet name down to just USI to simplify it. So, we're a fiber and wireless WISP operating primarily in the city of Minneapolis. And so we've been doing wireless now for 10 or 11 years. So there'll be a fun conversation today to talk about the good, bad, and the ugly associated with doing wireless in a metro area.
And what cities and others can do to try to change that equation to some extent.
You got it.
So, and I'm Christopher Mitchell, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Once upon a time, I thought this would be a good idea. And now I'm here talking to Travis every week with a rotating group of folks, trying to keep it light, trying to have a good time, trying to really bring, some perspectives of people that are generally doing things rather than commenting on the news all the time with people like me and our heads in the clouds. So I want to start off today, and I want to start by asking you, Deb. Let's just say for a second that the Biden administration hires me and tells me, Chris, figure out what we should do on broadband. And I come to you and say, Deb, tell me what I should tell these people to do on broadband. From your perspective, working with these innovative local companies, local grassroots efforts in many cases, what do you think they should do?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think what we've seen is over the past years, we've allocated a lot of broadband funding and granting. And we're still more or less in a similar place with the digital divide. One of the other things too is, we aren't looking at the digital divide in a multifaceted, nuanced way. It isn't just about building infrastructure. There's actually a recent study done in Portland, Oregon, where 13% of low-income folks with multiple choices of infrastructure, fiber networks, still did not have any access to internet. So if we're really talking about how do we fix broadband, how do we fix this digital divide, I think we need to have a more holistic approach to how we approach funding, right? So instead of saying, okay, we need 25/3 or 100 or, only the areas that have 10/1, or we don't want to overbuild, or all of these sort of, nuances around building, fancy pipes, as I call it, right? So the internet's a series of tubes, you're always going to need to have some, tube to the home. But it doesn't mean that people can access it. Oftentimes there's things like they can't afford it, it's not in the right language, they don't have the devices. So I would encourage the FCC to look at it from the services that we want to deliver to folks, whether that's telehealth, distance learning, job creation, all of the sort of things that are the benefits that come from the internet. That's really what we want to bring to all of our communities. So instead of looking at how can we deliver, 25/3, let's look at how do we deliver distance learning, because that also encompasses things like ping, latency, consistency.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that, and then of course also cost. This is the biggest thing. In Obama era, said he was talking about what are the main reasons why people can't access the internet, and cost was the main factor. In our urban network in Tacoma, Washington, right? There are lots of options for internet access, but we still went to homes that couldn't consistently afford to access the internet.
Yeah.
So,
sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I feel like, to some extent, what you're describing is what we've seen in Chicago and Denver, where they both had referenda. And I think the FCC would say Chicago and Denver are great examples of places that have figured it out. Like, they don't have a problem. And yet people there voted, 90% of the people who voted in Chicago said, we got a problem. We got to do better on broadband. And it seems like that's what you're sort of saying is like, this isn't about some federal database of measurements. It's about whether people are connecting for school and telehealth and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Well, a lot of it is inside the home too. What's really interesting is Microsoft has a lot of data on people that don't access the internet at broadband speeds, right? So I think it's like 40% of the US doesn't access the internet at broadband speeds. And oftentimes that's because, you might deliver broadband to the door, but somebody's got their router in a cabinet, right? Or, they don't have the right device. They have a very old cell phone or laptop they're using, and they're only getting a couple megabits per second just because the device isn't very good. So I think, when we're looking at the areas that have need, we need to look at what people are accessing the internet with, and then we need to look at how do we deliver services instead of how do we, deliver a fancy pipe.
So my first suggestion will be then to deputize an army of people to break into people's homes and make sure that their routers are ideally placed.
Well, one of the things that
it would probably make Mason's life a lot easier.
We're excited about actually doing some of that at the router level, and doing some dynamic, frequency and spectrum allocation within just the home router too. So I think we can make routers smarter, and that's where technology can come in and be helpful too.
Yeah, that's interesting. So Mason, let me ask you the same question then. And then, sometime in a few hours we'll get to Travis and maybe ask him what his opinion is. But so what do you tell the FCC right now?
Well, I mean, I was just wanted to dovetail onto what Deborah was saying about it's really challenging the issues facing access to internet. It's for different households and different neighborhoods. The challenges are very different. Like from an MDU where you can bring a gigabit pipe to the building, people in those buildings are still going to have problems versus single family homes and other neighborhoods are going to have very different problems. Like we have some examples where we're providing 100% free gigabit internet to like an MDU, a low income house. So all they have to do is get a router and plug it in, and they will have 100% free gigabit internet. And I
think just because you said that, I think it's important. There's usually someone from the housing authority which is going to help them. So it's not just a matter of telling them to go out in the streets and find a router. It's even easier than you might have suggested.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that's been the challenge. We've had to build a program where someone from the city has to get a router for them, make sure it's plugged in, and it's always just really important to have an internet service provider where they actually they don't just have a gigabit connection to their unit. They actually have someone they can call and ask a question to, especially with low income housing people too. Like a lot of times they'll have gotten a free device that has an Ethernet port from someone or somewhere, and they'll just plug it in, and they're like, I don't know, I have a router and I plugged it in and it's not working. And so, you really have to, see the problem of access, and you have to really take it through all the steps from providing broadband to the home that's fast enough, delivering it into the home, making sure they have a router that can plug into it, making sure that it's installed properly, having someone that can answer the phone. And then you also have another interesting issue here we see in San Francisco. We have a big diversity of housing types. Like we have a lot of SRO housing, which is single room occupancy housing, which is, mostly like, single people, maybe they're drug addicted or whatever, versus low income family housing, very different needs. So like in the SRO housing, actually just a Wi-Fi project in the building is going to meet their needs really well because they don't need to have their own home router. Whereas you have low income family housing, it's really important to have a real, have their own home router because maybe they'll have a TiVo set up and maybe they'll want to have their kids are going to need to access internet. So, it's you really, I guess so to bring it back to your question, whatever the program has to be, it really needs to be focused on all the levels from broadband all the way down to educating people. And just, there's no one size fits all solution. You need to actually bring in community partners. You want to make sure you don't just give all your money to Comcast to subsidize a network that they were already going to build. You want to make sure it's focused on areas where they weren't going to build. You don't need to convince anyone to build broadband to MDUs. Your MDU money needs to be spent on getting people routers. And so it's just, you need to really look at all the different pieces and really target it from education all the way to broadband. That's actually the answer to the digital equality. So
yeah, some of the points that both of you brought up just really resonated with things Travis and I talk about whenever we're discussing some of the issues that I know you face, Travis, when you're trying to figure out how to help with the many connections you have in MDUs. Do you want to just share any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Helping, I feel, is very challenging if people don't have access to devices and if they don't have access to the education or at least the resource that they can contact to help them. It's been a real challenge for us. So during this pandemic, we were doing something similar to what Mason was doing, of saying, hey, here's free access to the gigabit Ethernet jacks. And we found out very quickly that we had no laptops, we had no computers, we had no, routers were relatively easy to get our hands on, but the next level of technology was far more challenging. So we really, we hit some pretty serious roadblocks very quickly in the program.
One of the things that you've done, though, historically, I think, which I haven't heard many others doing, is you actually, when you're installing MDUs, you'll put a device on the wall often that does a Wi-Fi signal, right?
Yeah, we ran a program that we originally called a Smart Jack, which was having a router built into the wall in the units. And we had some pretty good success with it. What we learned is as router technology is ever expanding and changing, having something hard fixed to the wall ended up being not maybe the best idea. So we went up with a modified version, which was an Ethernet jack with a router sitting right next to it. And then we just built into our business model, if we lost a few every year for people taking them with them, so be it. It was just part of the deal. So our current model is, and actually where we're evolving to, because it's become very clear that speed is no longer the number one issue for people, it's reliability. So we've been really pushing heavy into the wireless mesh in people's homes, where they can get 2 or 3 little Wi-Fi pucks, place them around and have coverage. Yes, it might not be gigabit in every corner, but there's at least coverage.
Mm-hmm. So I want to move on just quickly because I want to make sure we have plenty of time to talk more about the cities and.
Did we ask the FCC to do something here?
To some extent. I mean, I think it's a matter of, what it comes down to is the FCC looks at this all wrong. And the answer is obviously to write big checks to AT&T, Comcast, and Charter Spectrum so that they are reimbursed for the $65 a month they want to charge these families.
Well, but we should touch on one thing the FCC did very well this year, I feel, and it goes unheralded in our community, is the opening up of the 6 gigahertz band for unlicensed use. I think that's going to revolutionize where we're at. So if the FCC is listening, we could really use some low band spectrum, something like down in like the 2.5 gigahertz or lower. That would be very useful for what we're trying to do, because it is difficult to wire MDUs. It is difficult to propagate these signals in urban areas. when it's up in the 5 and 6 gigahertz range. It's very, very, very challenging. So we need some lower spectrum, but where you're going with it, I feel it's all going to get auctioned off. There's too much money there. Why would they put it into the unlicensed pool, given the fact of they can collect billions of dollars for its usage? So
yeah, so Mason or Deb, you want to react to that? Because I'm very curious your experiences, how that resonates.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I'm wondering how you're thinking about because the lower bands are also penetrative, right? They have some non-line of sight properties, so you have more of an opportunity to have interference, right?
Mm-hmm.
So do you think about it more as like a SAS, like we see with CBRS or TV white space type of system? I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And so that would be, these lower bands would be allocated in that way.
And
yeah, I think the CBRS model has really proved that it's going to be effective for band reusage, because the problem WISPs have is interference.
Right.
And in a lot of cases, they have interference from other. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. I'll ramble on.
What does that mean? What does the SAS CBRS approach mean, Deb?
Yeah, and I think Travis might be able to explain it a little bit better, but it's more of a dynamic frequency allocation. You get a grant to utilize that spectrum for a certain amount of time, but there are folks that have priority, and so it's not you get this license for a years period long that you use, but it's more of a shared spectrum model. But perhaps Travis would like to expand on that.
Yeah, so. The best case, the example I always use is here in Minneapolis. We're right smack dab in the middle of the continent. So the CBRS bands that were released in the 365 range were historically used for Navy, and my understanding is predominantly on aircraft carriers. I've lived here 51 years. I have never seen an aircraft carrier on the Mississippi River. So this band effectively has been idle. So the idea behind these SAS services is that you can check out a piece of spectrum and use it for a period of time as though it's yours and not be interfered by other people while you're using it. Very effective use of instead of having the entire country or an entire census block owned by T-Mobile, we could all have our own little shared components of that spectrum depending on where we're at. Because I'm not going to interfere. My radio will not interfere with Mason or Deb, no matter what, no matter how powerful it is.
Because they're not allowed to use that grant of spectrum slice or channel that you're using. And
I'm in Minnesota, Mason's in San Francisco, Deb's in Oregon. We're not going to interfere with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this sort of leads into the CBRS discussion that I wanted to bring up with you. And the thing that I find amazing about that is what Deb just brought in terms of the fact that this is spectrum that will carry well beyond the walls of a building, is exactly what we're looking for to try to expand high quality access quickly. And Mason, I want to throw this at you. To some extent, this approach to me seems ideal for rapidly getting families online who are currently not connected, because whether they're in single family homes or not, if you can just hand a family a puck, to me, it seems like you have so many more opportunities to bring that family online than if you have to send someone to their home to put, Monkeybrains transceiver on the roof or something like that. And so I'm curious, are you planning on incorporating the CBRS technology into your services that you offer?
Well, I'm not really. I've seen some presentations about CBRS. I'm not a super expert on CBRS. But I do think, everyone's through all the different technologies, everyone in WISP loves the idea of just being able to put some kind of puck or tennis can or whatever out of your window and not have to do an installation. I think this has been the promise of WiMAX and Wi-Fi and free the internet and Starry.
You've heard it before.
Every technology has promised this, and I think it may come and it may be CBRS. But I would say for fixed broadband, I'm skeptical. I'm probably more on the skeptical side of the whole thing. I think Monkeybrains will continue to do fixed wireless using dishes for the time being. But I think CBRS seems really cool. I think a lot of people in low income housing too. We're talking back to what people in low income housing need, and a lot of them say they just want their cell phone to work better. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for for CBRS to help with cell phones working better in their areas. Like it's, we have in San Francisco, like, the 4G network's awesome downtown, but you go out to Hunters Point and it's hard to get a cell phone signal. And you're like, why is that? So if CBRS can help with cell phone and mobile, then I would think that would be a huge benefit to everyone. But I'll let someone else take the CBRS question.
Okay.
Yeah, we're actually deploying CBRS right now in Tacoma network in conjunction with a pilot with the University of Washington's Connectivity Lab. And what's exciting about that was that we're not only deploying CBRS, but we're also moving the EPCs closer to the edges.
What are EPCs?
So these are the computers that do the, how do I explain this? Essentially, an LTE model has a different model for authorizing the client devices, and they have small computers that called an EPC that does that kind of work. And typically, if you are a larger telco, you're going to have this at your data center, or you're going to have this on the cloud. And a lot of folks are using, cloud-based EPC type of providers like Druid. But what's exciting about the work with the University of Washington is that, when we deploy the EMBs, the sector antennas for CBRS, we can also locate the EPC there in a more distributed model. So this enables like smaller communities, smaller wireless ISPs to be able to kind of run this in a more distributed fashion, and perhaps also interoperate better. So it isn't as siloed like we see with these big, Verizons or Sprints or whatever. So we actually put our first CBRS antenna up about a week ago, and we have our first client online. It did not have building penetration. We were not able to penetrate the building, but we're still sort of experimenting with different types of gain on the antennas, different antennas. And so I'm hopeful that we will see a model with CBRS that does look more like a puck, or also have that device level down to the cell phone type of network.
Excellent. Travis?
So our initial pilots for CBRS were very similar to Deborah's experience. It was, first off, you don't get a big allocation of spectrum. You only get a 20 megahertz spectrum. So you're going to be looking at maybe 50 megabits of service. You're looking at the total.
Total. Okay.
Yeah. So it's wireless. It's a shared medium. Then you're talking penetration wise, your distribution was 6 to 8 city blocks. So, you're not talking a huge, you're talking about kind of like 1 mile around a building, and based on a tremendous amount of variables, vegetation, how far you are out from the cell site will vary your user experience. So yes, I don't know if there's really going to be a day where we just pass out a bunch of pucks like you do in an 800 megahertz LTE type model, but it certainly could make it where you put something in the window. And because the whole real mission here is self-install. If you want to roll out 30,000 clients, they have to be able to install it themselves, or it has to be built into their phone or their device. That's the holy grail of this type of system. I'm not sure CBRS gets us there because it's operating in the 3.5 band. We just don't have the penetration we need. We need to be much lower than that. But I think the FCC we have 2.4 Wi-Fi, but they won't open up anything. I don't think they open anything else up. I know in tribal communities, they just opened up 2.5, but we won't see that because I think T-Mobile sucked most of that up now from schools across the country.
The
so yeah. So unfortunately, I've told you, to us, wireless is just a tip of the spear. We get wireless out there to get people online, and then we back roll them with a wired technology. That's our mission, because wireless, there's just not enough spectrum available. There is in the 6 gigahertz band. I'll give you that, which is a huge boon. And I guess that would be under Trump's administration, right, Chris? That they did that?
Because you always,
I just call it the FCC. You always politicize it. To me, whoever did it, I don't care. So we have 6 gigahertz to play with today, which really you'll start seeing in 21. You'll start seeing products. The first ones will be point-to-point radios that ship at 6 gigahertz. I think it's going to be a game changer for the WISPs. It's just applying that into a metro area is going to be challenging. And then because you can talk about mounting assets and everything else, but it's just going to be challenging to have.
We just lost you, Travis.
Oh, sorry. It's going to be tough to have enough mounting assets for 6 gigahertz in a metro area.
Yeah. And I'll mute you again remotely if you make any political comments.
Yes, exactly.
So I feel like this does roll into the discussion that we want to have about the role that cities can play, because, we talked a bit about the FCC's decisions about spectrum. We've talked about, the technology in terms of where it works. But to some extent, cities have the power to do some things that may make our lives better, to encourage more investment, and they can do things that will make it harder. And Mason, I think it's really helpful to start in San Francisco, where you've been involved in this as Monkeybrains, at least. I don't know that you've been particularly the one working with the Board of Supervisors, but I think it might be useful to talk first about experience with MDUs. And tell me that I'm wrong, because I'm never afraid of being wrong if you listen to me. But over 6 years ago, I think if you'd asked me, I would have said like MDUs will almost always be the providence of like a cable company that has an exclusive contract, and like no one really wants to deal with the MDU buildings and things like that. And since then, there's all these business models that are just focused explicitly on MDUs, and it seems like it's an exciting place to be. So what can cities do around MDUs to make sure that we have lots of vibrancy in that space?
Well, great. This is a great topic for me. The San Francisco Bay Area is actually really fortunate. In a lot of ways, we have a number of different ISPs in the Bay Area. And in the ISP game, I heard someone like a few years ago use this term revenue density for telecom. And so I'm just probably been a term in the usage for years, but I heard it and it just explains the whole ISP game to me very frequently. Single family homes, maybe there's $200 of internet bill paid per acre, whereas in MDU, it's thousands and thousands of dollars. So ISPs are competing in the MDU space. And there's a pernicious scheme that has become more and more pernicious, where certain property management companies and even REITs who own billions of dollars of assets, get into cahoots with the cable companies, and they actually charge door fees and revenue share, all sorts of dirty arrangements where they actually charge the ISPs to enter the building. Out in a rural area where there's there's one ISP in town, it's actually the opposite. The ISPs, the AT&Ts actually extort the property owners to pay all their costs to bring ingress to the building. So anyways, getting back to this Bay Area and the MDU thing, the San Francisco has passed an ordinance, and I wish my colleague Preston was here because he's really up on all the policy stuff. But they passed an ordinance here that's saying that if anyone in your building wants to have any ISP, they can have whatever ISP they want. And in San Francisco, that's been a really big boon for us and other small ISPs, because you have a situation where there's a lot of internet choice in San Francisco, but many thousands and thousands of MDU units have a choice of one ISP, and that ISP charges them the highest rates. So it's ridiculous. So the Comcast, or I shouldn't even call it ISPs, but a lot of them do this game where they actually pay the building and they charge exorbitant rates to the tenants. And it's especially disgusting. This actually does happen in low-income housing buildings. They keep harping on this. I think they're a little bit. I don't think they're necessarily aware of which buildings they're doing it in, because it's just their whole plan. But right. It's extra gross when you're extorting money from low-income housing, I think. So San Francisco passed an ordinance saying that you can get into any building you want, and Monkeybrains has taken advantage of this to demand that we are allowed to provide access in some of the buildings. And it's been really helpful for us because like a lot of times these property managements are national. So even though we've been kind of knocking on the door for years, they're just kind of like, yeah, these decisions aren't really made here. I don't really know who you guys are. So it just kind of actually forces them to talk to us. And usually when we can talk to the right person, we're able to negotiate something really good. And yeah, they're working on a similar legislation in Oakland right now. We're working with the Board of Supervisors in Oakland to and other stakeholders, community groups, to pass a similar ordinance. Can I keep going for another minute? I've got another part of this.
Well, let's come back and I'm curious. You know, Travis, do you feel like you need a battering ram to get in some of these MDUs?
Yeah, I mean, when vacancy was low, it was more challenging to get in. We're starting to see some of those ease up now. And I think it's a real challenge for ISPs when they're first starting out, especially when they're unknown. But when you get to a certain density level in a neighborhood, so the approach we used in the beginning is we used tenant pressure letters, where we would send the tenant a letter and indicating that we would be happy to bring service into them, but they would have to work with their landlord to get us the ability to get in there. And that worked really well in the beginning. Now, as we've gotten a little bigger and a little more mature, what we're noticing is new development and new construction are coming to us to be part of the initial onboarding package of the building, which allows us to get our cables and our equipment in there on the front end. But if I was a brand new ISP starting out doing MDUs, I would really try to target the smaller MDUs, the ones that aren't owned by national conglomerates or large REITs, because those are very challenging, to Mason's point, to get in and can be very frustrating. So if you can find the local owned ones, maybe the smaller 8-unit or smaller type MDUs, those are tend to be a lot easier to penetrate. Now, from legislation, it would be really nice if we had something like that in San Francisco that they have, but we don't have that. We have to do it the old-fashioned way, convince and sometimes beg to get in.
And Deb, what are you seeing across the different places that you're working?
Well, I think, very much similar things. I do see that I think the internet as a whole is changing, right? We're starting to decouple the infrastructure layer, the fiber to the home from the service layer, similar to what we saw in Idaho, and we've seen in some of these rural communities where you have the fiber is being built in one way, or it's publicly owned, and then you have many different service providers competing for the top to be able to offer things like streaming video and all these different things. So I think that vision for MDUs is really where we need to get to if we're going to look at a more equitable future, right? Where we have, it's almost like a condo. Like if you own a condo, you also own, cooperatively own the elevators and so forth, right? So what if we thought about, apartments like that, like there was a cooperative ownership of the wiring to the building, and then your jack in your home is owned by you, and then different providers could compete for services over the top layer. And I think that's where we can get to some really kind of fun economic models. So hope to see some pressure toward that.
And that's what I feel like Mason taught me years ago, was that like ultimately the dream is more or less that I think you have wiring within the building that you're pretty much neutral to, and you have access to a room where you can just plug in 4F or whatever, and that person is on, and you basically don't have to worry about anything else, right? And I mean, is that too much of a simplification, Mason?
Sorry, could you repeat the last part of the question again?
Well, no, the question, I guess, is ultimately, I feel like if we're separating some of this out, I feel like to some extent you just want to focus on not even worrying about what's in the building. I think you just want to basically think about a room in which you basically have the demarc from your network, and then you're just throwing it onto the, into a switch there, and you don't have to worry about how the building's wired or anything like that.
Yeah. That's great. I think what WISP operators all have in common is that I think places where WISP operators have found a niche to solve problems, I think we're some of the more creative people in the ISP game. We get entry into buildings that are just for whatever reason, the incumbents haven't been able to service. So like you just said, are you sort of referencing the Amen model?
No, I was thinking more like just like an equipment room where like, I'm sure that, you're dealing constantly with buildings that are 50, 70 years old. And like, you're probably trying to figure out like, how am I possibly going to connect this person in this unit? And like, ideally, you would have like the whole building would be laid out and it all like home run to a single room, and you would be able to abstract everything else away. So, I mean, that's part of what, and I may have misunderstood what Deb was saying. So we'll come back to that after you try to untangle what I've just given you.
Yeah, I mean, we're really technology agnostic. We have some buildings where we put, MDUs where we bring a high capacity licensed radio to the roof, bringing like 10 gigabits. And, we go to the telephone room and there's old 100-year-old 2 wires. And we have, we use DSL technology to break it out. We have brand new build MDUs like Travis was mentioning, where we were there from the beginning and we got all the cabling right. We have some buildings that have fiber installed from the units to the MPO. So we use whatever technology is required to get it done. We even actually are now working on a project where we're participating in the Amen model thing, which has been really cool. We have all these subscribers that we didn't even have to work very hard to get it all. So we're just out there getting it done. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but
no, but I have this vision of you dangling off the side of a building, stapling, some sort of thin wiring to it in like a climbing rig, trying to get it done quick before someone calls the police.
That happens. That definitely happens.
So Deb, what have I missed in terms of the abstraction that you were just describing? Because I feel like I didn't capture it entirely. What's the transition?
I think that's pretty right. I think we can, basically what we're looking at here is both different economic models and also different ownership models, right? So who should own that fiber to the fiber to the apartment or the fiber to the condo in this MDU? Should that be owned cooperatively? Should the individual homeowner own it? Should the landlord own it? Should the carrier own it? And so some of these kinds of questions I think can lead to where we have a more, like you said, neutral platform, right? Like can you imagine if like the carrier owned the elevator? That wouldn't work, right? And they were charging a toll every time you wanted to go take your groceries to your house or something like that, right? We want to look at how do we make different economic models that where the providers of bandwidth incentives are in line better with the users.
This actually reminds me of a court case in the 90s, maybe it was even the late 80s, when we started seeing more municipal overbuilding. We saw municipal cable competition, and TCI at the time, I think, brought the city of Glasgow to court and asserted that all of the wiring within the customer's home, within my home, for instance, was owned by the cable company. And so if this new municipal operator wanted to use it, they would have to rewire the home entirely. And the courts rejected that. But as I understand it, so I mean, all the wiring within my home, even if Comcast did provide it, it is mine as a homeowner, and I can reuse it as I see fit. But this is a debate in different MDUs, as I understand it, as to who owns it and who can use it under what terms. Mason,
do you mind if I jump back in?
No, go ahead.
And also, what we've been seeing in our market is a sort of a pernicious incarnation of that, where there'll be a new MDU going up, and one of your favorite, incumbent carriers comes to the builders and say, "Oh, like fiber is the future. You're going to want to do fiber." And of course, we all love fiber. I don't disagree. Fiber is the best. But then they're like, and so let's just, instead of putting in all that cabling that you were going to install, let's just put a single strand of fiber to each unit, and then it's going to be the best technology ever, and it's going to solve internet forever. And that's well and good, but then your favorite incumbent carrier then comes and terminates all of that fiber into like a PON enclosure, where it essentially de facto locks them into a technology, and you can't have that carrier. Everyone in the building is basically locked into that carrier because all the fiber has been spliced into their equipment. And so another carrier can't come on and say, "Hey, we want to plug that in," because you'd have to break the individual fiber strands, and you're just going to do more damage than good. And that essentially locks buildings into, a single technology and a single carrier for the life of the building. And we're seeing this happen all the time. And sometimes it takes the form of actual cash payment to the building. Sometimes they offer to donate the materials. Sometimes they're just, just get bad advice, but they, they're actually really aggressive about this. And so we're out there trying to encourage, this is one of the big initiatives we're working on, is in markets where there's multiple ISPs, really encouraging carriers to, even if you're going to put in the fiber, we love fiber, but pull multiple strands to the unit, or terminate the fiber in a connectorized way so that different carriers can plug into the fiber. Go ahead and pull that Cat5 to the unit. Even if you're going to pull the fiber, the cost is almost nothing, because you really want to create options for the future. And I mean, this has been really important, especially in some of the fiber work we've been doing with the city of San Francisco, where, we have, once again, the city wants to bring fiber to a building, and they're like, oh, it's great, we've already run fiber to all the units, and the city brings fiber, and you're like, okay, well, can't we connect our fiber to that fiber? And you're like, no, you can't, because you're going to have to break everyone's internet in order to do it. It's not fiber to fiber. So I think
these are standards that cities should have. I mean, this is where it comes down to, and that's to some extent where I hope we'll see some of these lessons where they'll require proper structured wiring. So Travis, let me have you jump in here.
Mm-hmm. So I guess I've always approached the problem a little from the other angle, and I try to tell our guys, be the user. And what I mean by that is, when a user moves into their building, or they're into their apartment, it's really nice to have a clearly defined wall jack there for each of the providers. Whichever provider they choose, they take their router that they probably already own, at least half the people do, and they just plug it in and they're on. There's nothing more frustrating than shared wiring in a building where we have to, we can be out there next Thursday to plug you in, and you go down to the DMARC and cross connect F4. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to run two Ethernet runs and a fiber run to every unit. Now, I'll tell you, the fiber runs we did 10 years ago are still unused, but it helps sell the sizzle sometimes to the building owner that they're going to have fiber there. It sounds really high tech, when in fact one of the incumbents will use one of the Cat5 cables, we'll use the other one, and the telco or the cable company will use the coax. And that seems to be the best scenario for the end user, and quite frankly, the best scenario for us, because we don't have to roll a truck. Because I don't know about San Francisco, what's interesting in Minneapolis, and I didn't believe it when we first got into this, 50% of the apartments move every year. I mean, the churn is unbelievable. I don't get it. I hate moving. I'll sit here for the rest of my life just to avoid moving. Is every year 50. So the turn and the churn, and so you have to have a really effective way to onboard people and to take people off the system, because the 9 times out of 10, they'll, you want to give them a good experience, so they'll hook back up with you at the next building they go to. But one final point for us, technology synergy is very important for us. Every unit where we have a jack, it needs to be gigabit up and down. It needs to be Ethernet. We're not, like GFast or any of these DSL platforms. We've gotten out of that completely. So if we cannot wire a building or utilize wiring that's already in the building to provide gigabit to the unit, we actually won't do the unit. We won't wire the building. So because it's too confusing, right? Chris and Deb have gigabit, and Mason moves in, and it's like, well, no, you get 80 down and 3 up. I mean, it creates confusion that the end user doesn't know.
What if there's no other option in that building? Like, say it's just the limitation of the wiring that's been done. You guys will pass on a building if you can only do 100.
What we'll do then is we will do either raceways in the hallway, or in those buildings, we'll do fiber in the hallway. Like, you probably have these things too, these huge concrete bunkers they built in the 60s where you can't get a cable through to save your life. Mm-hmm. They'll either go with an external option, meaning down the hallways, or we just won't be able to service that building. Cool. We have, because otherwise for us it's too confusing for the end user, why we can't have service.
So I want to sort of recap for a second. There's 2 things we've identified so far that cities can do, policy can do to try to deal with this. One is to require the right of ISPs to come in when invited to provide service. The other would be having proper wiring to make sure that new construction or major retrofits would have the proper wiring to enable ISPs to do this without accidentally severing their rivals' networks, as I sometimes hear about. It's amazing how those accidents happen. But there's another piece of it that I think is sort of the really expensive option, and that would be cities building significant amounts of infrastructure so that, a provider doesn't have to figure out how to get from that city block all the way back to the POP or back to some other aggregation point. And I'm curious because this is where I feel like there's a lot of different opinions and technologies and possible. But Travis, since we ended with you last time, what would you be looking for if a city came to you and said, we really want your services, we want to make it easy on you, and we're willing to build conduit to your spec or whatever? What are you looking for?
So we've had a neighboring city of Minneapolis do that, where they built a conduit system to our spec, and then we pulled fiber in after the fact, and that actually worked out very well. It was no different than if we did it ourselves. I think what we've found from cities, though, is that's kind of the minority, and trying to get that, you have to have a really strong city manager or a CIO in place to really drive that through. So we try to baby step it a little bit, like in the city of Minneapolis. We have asked for just a very simple thing, that on new construction, that they have a carrier neutral conduit from the D mark out to the boulevard with a carrier neutral handhold that we can utilize. So we're just baby stepping it, trying to get that through, and that probably will never happen. And so, and I don't know if it's like this in other major cities, but it's not a huge political issue for people because everyone has cable and cell phones and everything else. So when you're a third provider coming in, there's not a lot of people to back you. You've got to have a lot of constituents that want your service. And most of the people at the city, when I talk to them, are solely focused on the digital divide, which I'm not, I'm a fan of, but it's not a focus of theirs to build infrastructure. At least, again, up in Minneapolis. I don't know what it's like in San Francisco. I mean, Mason, are you guys utilizing a bunch of conduit from the city of San Francisco on your build?
Well, this is a longer story, but we do have Monkeybrains for our network. It's mostly wireless, and we have leased fiber out to a whole bunch of locations. But we do a project where we have free gigabit internet for about 2,000 doors of low-income housing, and that's a kind of a neat project because so the city of San Francisco has a pretty extensive fiber network that they use for public safety, for fire stations, for libraries, their own operations. And what's neat about the program we're doing with them is, like I mentioned before, how in downtown San Francisco there's plenty of fiber, plenty of connectivity, but out in some of these low-income neighborhoods are underserved. So they actually can just decide to bring the fiber out there. And then when they bring it out there, we light it up for them. That's kind of our relationship with them. They set up the dark fiber, we plug in the switch, we answer the phone. If all of the Cat 5 to the units all to the spec, then we're happy to put in switching and operate the network and answer the phones for them.
See, and so we don't necessarily have that ability because all of the fiber that's in the ground is owned by the city. And my assumption is there's some law there that doesn't allow private companies to utilize it. And,
the law of bad bureaucracy, maybe.
Yeah. Because what's interesting here, at least in the city, is you'll have the city fiber, the county fiber, the state fiber, the federal fiber. I mean, we run into this stuff all the time when we're digging, but we have zero access to it.
Yeah,
and not a lot of motivated people to change that.
Yeah, I mean, there's two pieces of this that, and I'm really curious, Deb, because you have so many different experiences with different folks. I'm going to throw it to you next, but I think one of the things to be aware of is cities often have a fiber network that's been provided by the cable provider, and the cable provider has been very smart to basically say, hey, we'll build this cable network for you, but you can only use it for these purposes. You cannot use it to connect business customers or the public, and you cannot give it to Travis no matter what. And it used to be that they would do that and they wouldn't charge for it. It was part of just the franchise of being in the city and having access to the rights of way. And then Comcast and others figured, hey, we could start charging a lot of money for this. And so a lot of cities are now paying for that, but they're using fiber networks that are what we call conditioned, and they do not have the ability to operate on them to just do any traffic. But then there's other places where they do. And frankly, I think the bigger issue is just one of unwillingness to try new things rather than that first issue of a legal restriction. But Deb, what are you seeing out there in terms of this idea of if cities were trying to, provide infrastructure for multiple users, not necessarily in the way that Ammon is with virtual, with the software-defined networking and that sort of a thing, but actually through multiple conduits and things like that?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there when you were saying that they're sort of unwilling to sort of probe what the limitations are of what they can do. So we see this also too with a lot of these nonprofit networks too. Link Oregon in Oregon is a higher education network, but doesn't have a framework or cannot, have any of these private networks access their, thousands of miles of fiber infrastructure. So I'm hopeful that these sort of, push from 5G and smart cities and IoT will push us to sort of bring these discussions to light. But I also think there's some exciting work being done with Dig Once, where we can start to think about more kind of public, putting in infrastructure, once when you are opening up that road and what that right of way is, and starting to have those discussions then, instead of afterwards, once it's already covered up and done and built. But yeah, I mean, I think basically what I'm seeing is a lot of underutilized fiber that's sort of siloed behind our inability to have conversations about it.
Is there a future in which the ISPs just start to become irrelevant, where city provides conduit to the corner? Maybe originally the ISP figures out how to get from the outside of the block into the building, and then the condo association carries it the rest of the way, and over time there's just less of a even service that ISPs are providing? Or do you feel like there's reasons that will never come to pass?
Well, I think a better solution might be the checks and balances and the sort of shared benefit of a multi-stakeholder model that's interoperable, right? So at the core of the internet, back at the IX, we all go to the meet me room, right? And everybody interconnects and is interoperable, but still has owned infrastructure. So I don't see any physical reason precluding that from happening in cities either, where multiple carriers, large enterprise, nonprofit, municipal, folks can own different pieces of the hardware. You just need a platform to interoperate on, like we do very successfully at the sort of tier 1 level of the internet.
And I'm curious if Mason or Travis want to react to that. And I can guarantee you that Travis will not use the word multi-stakeholder.
Well, so let's talk a little bit operationally, and then I'll get Mason's thoughts on this. So you also have the practical fact of operating a fiber network, and you always have to be playing defense. And what I mean by that is it's not if, it's when there's going to be a fiber hit, and there's going to be a cut, and it's going to take out a certain number of subscribers. So the ultimate question is, how do you handle resolution and repair? So let's just assume for conversation that the city is responsible for that. And you as an operator on that network, what is going to be your answer back to your customers who are demanding that service gets back up and running, but the city only operates from 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. So there's much more to it than just the conduit in the ground, because I would rather own and control my destiny than be relying on a third party, especially for that mission critical piece, the backbone, because the backbone could take out thousands of people if it's mismanaged.
So let's go to Mason, but I also just want to note in defense of cities that firefighters operate 24/7.
Sure. Yep. No, I'm with you.
Well, I mean, I think you're Travis, you're getting to the point of resilience. And I mean, I think that's the whole business of building a network. You build a network, you build backup, and different links are going to have more resilience and vulnerabilities. So you need to focus on diverse path and all sorts of, just trade-offs, I guess, when you're building a network. But I think, currently when you're planning a fiber route across an urban area, like you may go and you may plan a certain section of the conduit and a section of the fiber build in your conduit, and then you need to like arrange for a mile of Zayo's conduit, and then it might go to a splice cam on AT&T's conduit. And some of these long builds can be quite complicated and involve engineering with a lot of different providers, and you may have your fiber and someone else in AT&T's conduit. I mean, these arrangements are already happening and are standard. It's usually an engineer from one company talking to an engineer at another company to figure these things out. I think that municipalities should get into the game. I mean, they own conduit sections that no one else has. Certain public utilities like PG&E are very heavily into this game on both on their poles and their conduit assets. They're very expensive to be in, but no one's going to cut a PG&E conduit. So I just think municipalities, it would be nice if they had some smart people working in telecom who could understand the value of their assets, be willing to like lease them out, trade them in a smart way. I know some of our partners in the city of San Francisco are oftentimes reluctant to make these arrangements because they're actually worried they're going to get taken advantage of, because they have been taken advantage of. But then sometimes they'll come back and they'll they like, oh, we're thinking about leasing fiber, and they come up with these prices, and you're like, these prices are so high,
and you
don't want to be taken advantage of, but then you want to be competitive.
It's part of a 47-page contract too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, dealing with getting a check from the city is very difficult. So there's not. But I think it would be smart for them to be in the business, and also like if on their fiber network. They should be building their fiber network, building their own smart cities applications on there. Then you're going to have more of a larger NOC team who understands the network, which is going to mean you understand the value of your network. You're going to have more telecom contracts. You're going to understand, the value of the contracts you're buying, and then also helps you understand the values of your assets that you can lease or trade. And so, I just like to see cities be willing to mix it up a little more, even if they're going to get taken, even if maybe they don't do great on every single deal.
Deb, I cut you off earlier.
Oh, I was just saying, I mean, isn't this similar to the peering agreements we have, like deeper in the network? I mean, we just bring them out to the edge.
That's what I'm kind of hoping for. And I mean, to some extent, like in my mind, simpleton that I am, it's like, what if that meet me room was just extended to a lot more city block corners?
Yeah, that's the vision. That's the vision I have, is that let's bring that. I mean, and what we saw that happened there when we have that kind of interoperability is that the price for bandwidth at the data center has been going down consistently over, more than a decade. And I think that kind of, interoperable marketplace will also have the same effects at the edges. We'll see prices go down.
So Mason, as we have a couple of minutes left, did we hit most of the items that you've dealt with? Did we miss any key ones?
I think you got all the things all my whole shtick. I don't have that much to talk about. So.
Well, Chris, but you got to ask about the big elephant in the room here. Which is the impending 5G doom coming all of our way.
The question in my mind was which number Travis would put in front of G.
Well, remember, I've told you 12G is the real one we got to worry about, but we're dealing with 5. So, yes, I'd love to get everyone's opinion on the. And I actually have a story of a 5G user that I can close with.
His name is Unicorn.
Yes, I'd be curious what Mason and Deb thought of the upcoming amazement known as 5G is looking like for you guys.
Deb, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, LTE is a big part of our strategy going forward. Sort of the essential thing we believe in is the interoperable platform and making a platform so folks can bring that meet me room to the edges. And I think LTE is part of a big part of that, right? So for us, the advancements in the 5G, especially in 802.11ax, will be advantageous for that. We just need to parse the technology to be utilized by smaller carriers and communities instead of being in the realm of monopolistic telcos.
That was way less snarky than I expected.
We also, I mean, we've done plenty of, I think we've all done plenty of 60 gigahertz millimeter wave stuff. So if that's what folks mean by 5G, that's already being deployed, of course.
Yawn.
Yeah.
And Mason, so one of the lines I was thinking of was when 5G comes up in the office, are people usually laughing or having a different reaction to it?
I guess I'll provide a little of the snark that you're looking for. We don't talk about 5G at all. So at our office, I think Deborah has probably a much clearer idea about the industry and where the technology is going. We're really focused on our business here. And so I'm looking forward to a faster smartphone. I will continue. I can't wait for the next generation of radios to come out. And if they want to call them 5G, we'll use them. If they want to call them something else, we'll use them. I mean, we probably have 8,000 fixed 60 gigahertz radios deployed on our network. So if that's 5G, then we're using it a lot. I'm not really sure what it's called, but we use a lot of fixed 60. And we love radio, and we'll keep using it.
I'll say that I am planning on upgrading my phone with the coming deals toward the end of this month, and my phone's 2 years old, and I do not expect to get a 5G capable phone because I just don't care, and I frankly prefer stronger battery life than sucking down a little bit faster downloads, at the expense of that battery life. So, I'm excited for what 5G will do over the next 10 years. I just don't really care what it's going to do over the next 2 years at all.
So my theory, I have a new theory this week. 5G is deployed to and marketed the way it is to confuse lenders, who would possibly be lending to smaller WISPs and fiber providers.
Been saying that for 2 years.
I thought this was an original idea. So as somebody that does work with our banks, it is the number one question we get as far as that goes. But the little story I have is a friend of mine decided to take advantage of T-Mobile's brand new 5G product. Ordered up, got the little box, brought it home, fired it up, and that box is now being returned back to T-Mobile. The experience was abysmal at best. So
did they not achieve the full 20% speed gain that T-Mobile actually suggests you could relive?
No, it was ridiculous, to be honest with you. But in fairness, who knows how close they were to a cell site? The whole thing. But it was our example number one has not gone well.
Yeah.
Isn't T-Mobile planning on, or is it Sprint, 700 megahertz band for their 5G deployments? I think they're more looking for coverage than they are.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but we've had a huge deployment of Verizon putting up microcells all over the Twin Cities here. This was a big rollout this summer, and
that's why you have no customers left.
Yeah, boy, it's hard to find a customer nowadays. Yeah, no, they The reality is so far it's not all it's doing is confusing lenders at this point for us.
Yeah, my understanding
for Mason.
Before you do that, my understanding from what Deb was saying is that yes, the Sprint combination with T-Mobile is very much about a barely faster. It's basically, I think I've been trying to explain it to people as making 4G LTE show up on your phone as 5G deeper into rural areas, and it will be slightly better than the 4G LTE you used to see before. But I think the goal is definitely a landmass rather than all the other stuff we've been sold on.
The unfortunate thing is oftentimes these carriers use this excuse to decommission other towers, and then leaving a lot of, this is mostly an urban discussion, but definitely leaving a lot of rural folks in the lurch as they decommission towers to move over to whatever latest technology. So
when you say decommission towers, they actually take the towers down then? What does that mean?
I think a lot of times it just means that they turn off radios, right? So you had a while back in Montana, this was a big thing too, a few years ago, when they were switching over a lot of their things to 4G LTE from 3G. They would just turn off the radios on 3G and would not continue to upgrade or maintain those. So that meant that a lot of folks who, on the ranch who had a flip phone just did not get any internet at all.
It's usually a real estate problem. They need to put up the new 5G antenna, and they don't have enough space. So down goes the 3G antenna. I was going to ask Mason, are you guys a Ciclu platform? What are you guys running in your 60 gig?
We use we love Ciclu for their 70, 80 gigahertz radios. They're really awesome and rock solid, and that's like the core of our wireless network. But yeah, for the Ciclu, we use the Ciclu, what's it called, the multi-haul.
Okay.
And we also use a lot of the MikroTik ones. It's really cheap and reliable, and it's
okay.
So
sure. Do you guys have big line of sight issues out there, or?
Well, it's one of the interesting things about San Francisco is there's a lot of hills, and so it's you can kind of in a lot of tall buildings, and so we're actually kind of lucky. You can use the high low of all the hills buildings. So we jump around. So we basically put a number of radios on each roof, and at some of the core sites we do layer 3 networking, and it's a big mesh is not, I guess, not the technical term, but it's a big mess is what it is.
Yeah. And Chris, it's a key point when it comes to wireless. Cities that benefit from not having a lot of trees will do much better than we do here in like a jungle. Or I don't know what Oregon's like, but I'm assuming you guys have heavy tree cover out there. But like Tucson, Arizona, that should be the poster child for wireless technology.
I remember one of the times you were telling me about if you ever see a demo for wireless in Tucson, you're very suspicious.
Oh yeah. If there's no attenuation out there, wireless works really well. It's why rural works so well out here on farmland. Mm-hmm. Because you can shoot 5-6 miles with nothing in the way. I mean, it's a perfect application for it. But in downtown Minneapolis in July with full bloom, I mean, it's a whole different animal.
Mason, you're going to provide us with a concluding comment, maybe?
Oh, I was just going to say, on the geeking out about spectrum, I think, sometimes, your 700 megahertz spectrum is licensed for, what did you say it was for? I forget who you said, but and then you're trying to get the 3 gigahertz spectrum. That spectrum propagates really far, and so, in an urban area where there's lots of hills and buildings, it's nice. Like 5 gigahertz is great because it maybe doesn't go as far as 2, but it kind of creates an insulation. It blocks the signal. So sometimes blocking signal actually benefits you because it creates a quieter noise environment. One of the great things about 60 gigahertz is that, it sucks that it doesn't go very far, but you don't have noise interference with anyone else. So, it's the good and the bad of some of the spectrum.
I'm envious if you have line of sight. We have about less than 10% of the city that would qualify for line of sight. So, and then where there is quality line of sight, we have these things called skyways, which are these bridges between buildings, right smack dab in the middle. So it's a wireless challenge up here.
And then also the 20-foot piles of snow. Part of the
Yeah, true.
And so any concluding comments, Deb?
Nope, just I agree with what everybody said here. This was a really great discussion.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with it. I really appreciate you taking the time, and thank you everyone for tuning into Connect This. And we'll see you again in probably 2 weeks. I think we may not be back next week, but thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, guys.
All right, see you guys. Thank you.
All right, let's end the stream there, but stop the recording. That was great. And you can let Preston know, Mason, that we'll keep an eye out for when we can have him on as well. So it's you're muted right now.
Yeah, he loves to geek out on the policy stuff. I'm just much more focused on building the network. So
yeah, no, it's great, and I think it's worth noting though that if we had to recreate the internet, I think Deb would be the only one qualified to do it because of that grasp of the multi-stakeholder. Which I just feel like people a lot of people are less interested in that, but that stuff is fascinating. How you actually get all these different people to agree, and it just gets back to I did a series of podcasts with Fred Goldstein about what the internet really is. And the internet is like social agreements, it's like.
Yeah, that's the thing is you get back to, whether, wherever you're at the IX, and it's really just, or at NANOG, right? Every year at NANOG, there's the tables, people get together, they make peering agreements, And how do we standardize this? How do we do this with software so this can come out to the edges? Because it works really well.
Yeah.
So do you have like does your platform, I didn't really do any research before this show, but like does your platform sort of introduce like people for peering arrangements, or what?
So it